Welcome to Fraud Friday. I'm Bob Coleman, and we're talking loan fraud, bankers, public officials, and borrowers who got caught. Today, I want to talk about SBA's approach to COVID-19 loan fraud. New SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler, in her first day memo, said, hey, we're going to crack down on fraud. Gave the usual shot for a prior administration that every new administration does, and says, look, we have $200 billion of fraud. We don't like what the previous owners of the program did, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. The problem is, as always, is the numbers. But one of the things that SBA has said they will do is they're going to get an audited financial statement. We don't know the numbers. We do know where the $200 billion number comes from. It was the June 2020 SBA Inspector General white paper that said, hey, we have $136 billion in idle economic injury disaster loans and $64 billion in PPP loan fraud. That was their estimate. Interesting, also sort of a side note, but it's important for this discussion. EIDL is a program that is directly funded by SBA. PPP had to be funded through a bank. On a percentage basis, that percentage of fraud is much lower in PPP on third-party participants than direct lending from the program. I digress. So is it really $200 billion? The problem is, in Washington, D.C., perception is reality. And the new chair of the Senate Small Business Committee, Joni Ernst, says, hey, it's $200 billion. And we've been critical of going after, of pushing SBA in collecting those fraudulent payments. And I'm going to push for that. She's introduced legislation to fund the special investigator for pandemic loan fraud recovery. That's different than the SBA Inspector General. But we don't know what the number is. SBA countered the white paper in June and said, hey, there's a couple of things that you're missing. This is June 21, 2023 from Acting Associate Administrator, Office of Capital Access, Bailey DeVry. Says, you did not acknowledge that 86% of the fraud occurred in the first draw PPP loan. And that's before there was this 14-point fraudulent checklist that lenders needed to do, and that cut down significantly on fraud. And SBA is implying you're using the same percentages on first draw and second draw PPP loans. So we don't like your assumptions and your numbers. And by the way, I'm not about to get into the statistics of this. OIG has their set of numbers. SBA has their set of numbers. And as I said, the Senate believes the $200 billion, and that's sort of what we're going to be focusing on until SBA comes back and says, hey, it's not really $200 billion, it's X. But it doesn't, look, loan fraud is loan fraud. If they committed a crime, they need to be held accountable, fined, jail time, whatever the appropriate sentence is. I'm not letting these people off on the hook at all, because the problem is these loan fraudsters, they're putting a black eye on SBA currently, and also when we have another disaster, and we will in the future, I'm not Nostradamus, but there will be another problem where we need to go in and bail out America's Main Street. And I don't want to have a reluctant Congress and a presidential administration fail to do that because of the loan fraud that occurred during the pandemic. Point number two, it said that 34% of the potential loan fraud in COVID EIDL loans does not stand up because SBA is saying, hey, some of these loans are being repaid. And it's not 34% fraud, but when you count in the repayments, now we're down to 12%. So we don't like your number. Common sense dictates that a bad actor would not fraudulently obtain a loan, only to repay it with interest. Well, the Inspector General disagrees with that. Third, the white paper presents a summary of loans that are potential fraud. Now you get into the dancing, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, as if they were likely fraud. I love this line. It is important to provide clear definitions of terms like potential fraud to differentiate from likely fraud or confirmed fraud. Look, fraud is fraud, and it's a problem. And I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Ami Kassar, who dropped an article today saying, I think it's important to remember there's a big difference between losses caused by fraud and losses caused by bad loan policies, and also losses caused by businesses simply failing as a result of the economic problems they were operating in under the pandemic. And that is critical. So just because a loan doesn't pay doesn't mean it's fraud. So Ami makes a very clear distinction that because you have, let's not bundle this all together, and let's definitely go after the bad actors, but he's saying what I'm saying also, let's get to the numbers. Let's just don't throw out these numbers based on statistical analysis where the assumptions are wrong. And here I'm not taking a side. I don't know if it's $200 billion. I don't know if it's $400 billion. I don't know if it's $50 billion. All I know is the government doesn't have a handle on it. They acknowledge it. They're going to get the audited financial statements. And actually, they're going to do both. They're going to audit their financials, and they're going to do a specific audit of the PPP loan program to find out what's going on. And then they are going to aggressively go after the fraudsters, and as well as go after delinquent debt. If the companies filed bankruptcy and the owners filed a personal bankruptcy, then you let that go through the system. SBA, by the way, they have a great philosophy. They believe in life after death, economic death. And you didn't succeed, go through the system, and we close up the file and we move on. But we're going to explore all of alternatives. And if someone has a house and they signed a personal guarantee, then we want to go after it. Now, EIDL, they did take collaterals houses. PPP did not have personal guarantees. But remember, if the loan is not forgiven, then it's on that company's books, and there are going to be the normal recovery processes of that if it's a fraudulent loan, or even if it's an unforgiven loan, and we need to explore that. And I think that's fair and is appropriate, and I applaud the administration for doing that, with the caveat, let's understand the underlying numbers and let's move from there. Thank you for joining me today for Fraud Friday, so you can stop criminals from stealing from you.